hello, jingle jingle.
Hello humans and happy holidays! My name is Dale Kingsmill and today it is time for a Christmas story from me to you. Oh! I like Christmas and 'tis the season for Christmassy stories. So let's get cracking, shall we? That joke will make sense in a second. This is the story of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King. The children of Dr. Stahlbaum were not allowed into the family room on Christmas Eve, and they weren't even allowed into the adjacent living room. So of course, come midnight on Christmas Eve, the children of Dr. Stahlbaum were in the adjacent living room, huddled in a corner in the dark, whispering about the present-y themed goings-on that must be happening in the family room. In fact, Fritz was just about finishing telling his younger sister Marie about how earlier in the day he had heard all sorts of wondrous whizzes and pops and bangs and fizzles and drills and hoopity-loos. That's not a sound effect, that's not onomatopoeia, coming from the other side of the door in the family room. And he knew that old Judge Drosselmeyer must be behind it. Judge Drosselmeyer, their godfather, was this super weird dude. He was shriveled with age and basically made of wrinkles. And this man could make the most wondrous things. Simply incredible. We're talking dwarf levels of craftsmanship here. The old eccentric wore an eye patch over his right eye, and where all of his hairs had gone missing, he had decided that the best way to combat his baldness was to make himself a wig out of glass. A head of super fancy, fine glass hairs to cover, but certainly not hide, his barren scalp. He wore a big ugly yellow coat full of chunky pockets from which he used to pull toys every time he visited to give to the kids that he'd made himself. And when he came to do his work, he would put on a bright blue apron. I mean his crafting work, not his judging, not his passing judgment. Although, I mean, with this dude, who knows, really. And Drosselmeyer would often visit the Stahlbaum household in order to fix a clock if it stopped tick-tocking quite correctly, which he'd do by jabbing them with all sorts of sharp, pointy instruments, something that Marie really didn't like because she felt like it was hurting the clocks. And so we get our first glimpse of Marie's somewhat unhealthy, empathetic attachment to inanimate objects.
Well, that's gonna be a theme of the story.
And with Godfather Drosselmeyer involved, these kids knew that they were getting the best present haul they had ever gotten. The clock struck midnight, and the Stahlbaum parents flung open the doors to the living room, having heard the chatter on the other side and knowing their kids were there, and invited them in to come and have a look at what they'd been given. Inside, the children beheld the most glorious sights. Presents galore! The tree! The tree! Every single gift was miraculous perfection. Fritz's favourite present was clearly his brand new battalion of hussars to add to his already quite large toy soldier army. But Marie found it harder to choose as there was such a wide array of lovely things for her to play with. As more and more gifts were removed from under the tree, however, a small man became visible. So Marie went over to get a closer look. He wasn't a pretty little man. He had a torso that was rather too stocky and long for his little spindly legs. And if we're on that matter, his head was massive, like way too big. He had a fairly pleasant smile, although it was probably much too wide to be pretty, and his light green eyes were bulging and kind of buggy. Apart from these features, he was dressed fairly elegantly, but Marie just thought about old Judge Drosselmeyer and how, even though he was super ugly, he was a fairly nice dude, so she became instantly attached to this ugly little man. Marie's father told her that this was a nutcracker, and he'd gotten it for the whole family to share today, and he showed her how to crack nuts in his little mouth. And Marie loved this new nutcracker toy. She sat all day finding the smallest nuts to gently crack with his mouth so that she wouldn't hurt him. But her father had specifically told her that she was to share it with her brother and sister. So when Fritz came over and asked if he could have a go, Marie was obliged to let him. And of course, Fritz, military Fritz, found the biggest, hardest nut he could, shoved it in the Nutcracker's mouth, and crack! It was not the kind of deliberate crack that Marie had become accustomed to hearing. No, rather, Fritz's behavior had split off the little Nutcracker's jaw so that it hung limply, as if it was broken. I mean, it was broken. It was broken, but I meant like a human broken jaw, but like he's made of wood, you know what I mean. And a couple of his little Nutcracker teeth had fallen out. Marie was so upset that she cried and cried, and she ran to Judge Drosselmeyer with it and said, "Godfather, you're so good at fixing things, can't you fix my Nutcracker?" And Judge Drosselmeyer just scoffed and said, "Why would you want to bother with such a hideous little man? He's not worth anything." Marie was offended. She felt rage bubbling up inside her, and she came back with a snappy, sassy remark, saying to Judge Drosselmeyer, "Well, you're pretty ugly too, and you know what? If you were shrunk down and put into his clothes, I don't think you'd look as nice as he does, so there." That night, as the Stahlbaums were heading to bed, they put their favourite gifts up into a special display cabinet where they kept all of their favourite things. Marie usually kept on her shelf in this cabinet her special beautiful dolls who sat in lovely furniture in the most exquisite-looking little doll room. But today she banished her prettiest doll to sleep on the couch and gave the bed to the poor sick Nutcracker, who she bandaged up with one of her little ribbons around his head to hold his jaw in place. Now Marie was the last to finish up and start heading into bed, and as she turned to leave, things got hella trippy. She looked up at the clock at the end of the room. It had just turned midnight, but the owl on top of it had suddenly covered the face of the clock with its wings to hold down the hands and stop it from ding-donging midnight. What's that called? From tolling midnight, from dong, striking midnight. It didn't make the noise. Technical terminology with Dale. Suddenly she heard all sorts of scurrying and squeaking in the walls and all in the floor, and thousands upon thousands of mice wormed their way out of every crack and crevice into the room and formed ranks, exactly the way Fritz would have set up one of his armies. Looking up at the clock again, Marie saw that it wasn't an owl anymore. It was Judge Drosselmeyer, perched on top of the clock, sticking his yellow coattails over the face of the clock and jeering at her and stopping it from dinging and scaring away the mice. Then the mouse army began cheering and chanting as a little part of the floor seemed to explode, and a huge mouse with 7 heads, each topped with a vicious crown, crawled out from the ground. In such a fright, Marie stepped back and accidentally bashed into the display cabinet, sending her elbow... My reindeer antlers fell off. Oh. Sending her left elbow right through the glass, shattering it to pieces. She was bleeding a lot and she was definitely scared. But then she heard a small voice behind her saying, "Awake! Awaken! To battle!" She turned around and saw the Nutcracker and all of Fritz's toy soldiers begin leaping down out of the cabinet and forming ranks of their own against the mouse army. A mighty battle ensued in which the toys were firing out of teeny tiny toy cannons little sugar lumps about the size of peas that would hit the mice, and they didn't hurt the mice, but they covered them in a powdered sugar, which was very demoralizing. And the mice in turn attacked, throwing some kind of stink pellets that covered the little hussars in stains and made them smell bad and made them really embarrassed to keep fighting. The mouse army even had a cavalry regiment. I don't know how that works when the entire army is mice. Is it just mice riding mice? That seems like that's... Okay, I'll take it. The fierce combat raged on until eventually the mice had depleted the entire toy army. All but a handful had been decimated or had retreated or had deserted the Nutcracker in his time of need. And now that last handful were trying desperately to leap back up into the cabinet. But the little Nutcracker, with his tiny spindly legs and his much too large head, wasn't nimble enough to do it, and some mice came in from the sides and grabbed him. Just as the Mouse King leapt forward to take the final blow and kill the Nutcracker once and for all, Marie had had enough. She slipped off her left shoe and just lobbed it at that Mouse King. Lob it! Kill it! Kill it! And then, finally, the blood loss got to her and she passed out. She woke up in her own bed in a daze, muttering things about the mice army. Are the mice gone? How's the Nutcrackers? Is it safe? Is he safe? Where's the Nutcracker, the mice? Her mother explained that she'd gotten worried when she noticed Marie wasn't in bed yet after midnight and came out to check on her and found her collapsed on the floor in a pool of blood, broken display cabinet, flippin' pulled apart toys all over the floor, and her left shoe way up the corridor. What on earth were you doing, Marie? Marie tried to explain about the Mouse King with the 7 heads and all the toys were alive and there was a battle, a big battle happened. Dr. Stahlbaum assured her that she was just hallucinating from wound fever and she'd be fine in a couple of weeks. She just had to rest now. Next thing Marie knew, Judge Drosselmeyer was bursting into the room in his big yellow coat and asking how she was. "You," she said, "you are such a baddie. I saw you. You were helping the mice. You were sitting on the clock and you were stopping it from striking midnight so they wouldn't be scared away. You're such a baddie. Why didn't you help the Nutcracker, you baddie?" Needless to say, everyone was a little freaked out by that outburst. Everyone except for Judge Drosselmeyer. The old man just sat himself down on the bed next to Marie and said, "Now, my dear, you mustn't be angry with me for not poking out every single one of the Mouse King's 14 eyes. I have done something for you that I think might make you a little bit happier." And he pulled out of one of his big chunky yellow pockets the Nutcracker, newly repaired. "Now sit back, kid, I'm gonna tell you a story about how he got so damn ugly." You see, a very long time ago, there was a king who loved sausages. And he was going to have a sausage party, a sausage fest, if you will, a festival of sausages. And he was so excited about his sausage party that he invited every important person in the land to come and sit at his table and share in his sausages. He hopped around the kitchen, hugging his wife, the queen, in one arm and stirring with the other, using his golden scepter in a pot full of boiling water to prepare the sausages in. But of course, when it became time for the most important step in the cooking process, which is apparently something to do with, I don't know, sausage fat and cutting it into cubes or something, the queen demanded that everyone else leave the kitchen and let her complete this step on her own, as it's something that she wanted to do for her husband, because she loved her husband, and her husband loved sausages. As she went about cutting up the fat into cubes, however, she heard a tiny little voice behind her, saying, "Oi! Oi, sister! Sister! I'm a queen! I'm a queen of Mouseland that's under your oven, and I'm entitled to some of that fat, so give me some fat to eat, please." It was Lady Mouserings, the crazy old mouse that lived under the stove. But even though the real human queen didn't recognize Lady Mouserings' royal authority, she was a nice person and said, "Sure, come on up and have some of the fat." But the ungrateful Lady Mouserings invited her entire massive family to come eat it too. She brought her aunts, her uncles, her cousins, her nephews, her nieces, her 7 sons, everybody came to eat the fat, and eventually there was barely enough fat for the humans to eat. The queen had to shoo them all away before they ate every last bit of it. But it was fine, she thought. She'd solved it, there was still some fat, it was going to be okay. Everybody at the sausage feast loved it. Every course was a delight. Oh, delectable, mwah, mwah, delicious, ooh, yes. Everyone except the king. Abe Froman over here got more and more dramatic after every single course. He's leaning back in his chair and sighing loudly, "Oh! Oh!" People were starting to think something was seriously wrong until he finally managed to croak out, "There wasn't enough fat." Seriously, dude? Really? Really? Upon finding out that it was Lady Mouserings and her family who had eaten his precious sausage fat, the king hunted each and every one of them down in traps and had them executed for their crimes against the kingdom. Every one of them except for Lady Mouserings, who was just too clever. A year or so later, the king and queen had their first child, a beautiful baby girl, full head of curls. Everyone thought that she was so gorgeous that they did this weird silly dance where they spun around on one leg. She was even born with 2 complete rows of pearly white teeth, which is creepy if we're being perfectly honest. And when she used these to bite the finger of the chancellor who tried to get a better look at her, everyone just thought that that meant that she was going to be the cleverest in all the land. Everyone was so cheerful and merry, except for the queen, because the queen had been visited by Lady Mouserings, who threatened the baby and said, "You better watch that kid, or I'm gonna bite her to pieces." The queen couldn't think of what else to do but to constantly station around the new baby's crib a team of specially trained maidservants who would hold tomcats on their laps and stroke them at all times so they would continue purring, warding off any mouse baddies who might take an interest in the child. Of course, one night one of these maidservants woke up and realized that she was sitting in complete silence. Every maidservant had fallen asleep and had stopped stroking the cats, and so the cats had fallen asleep as well. She quickly turned to the crib and saw Lady Mouserings sitting just 2 inches from the baby's face. She gave a shout, and like a shot, all of the cats were up and after Lady Mouserings, who just managed to get away in a hole in the corner of the room. The ruckus, however, woke the baby up, and for a moment they thought, oh, thank goodness she's still alive, she hasn't been bitten to pieces. Until they looked, and this beautiful baby princess was suddenly the most hideous thing they'd ever seen. Because it turns out, Lady Mouserings, bit of a wizard. The baby was now cursed. Her head was huge, much too big for her body and her little spindly legs. Her eyes were now light green instead of their pretty blue and bulging and bugging out. Her mouth was much too wide for her face, and everyone was so upset that they couldn't look at the pretty baby anymore. I mean, if you thought the king was upset about his sausage fat, you should have seen him now. The king blamed everything on the court inventor who had invented the mousetraps to kill Lady Mousering's family. This court inventor also just happened to be Judge Drosselmeyer. Drosselmeyer, he said, you have 4 weeks to figure out how to save my daughter and get her back to her normal self, or I'm executing you publicly and embarrassingly. You will be embarrassed about it. Drosselmeyer didn't know what to do. He just sat staring at the baby for 4 weeks trying to think of something. Eventually, he went and visited his friend, who was the court astrologer, and they read the baby's star signs and found out that what they had to do was find a very specific nut called the Crackatook. They ran with this information to the king, who praised them and said, oh, oodalally, you found the solution, we'll do it tomorrow. But it's not that simple. See, the baby girl needs to eat the meat of the Crackatook, but the Crackatook is the hardest nut in the world. It cannot be cracked. Wagons full of cannons have run over it, and it's not even split. Not to mention, we have no idea where such a nut would be found. To add to that problem, it needs to be cracked by a young boy who's still never shaven and who's never worn boots, and he has to crack it between his teeth and then hand it to the princess with his eyes closed and continue to step backwards 7 times without stumbling. The king was so not impressed. Alright, well, you two are banished until you find the Crackatook. Don't you come back here without an unbreakable nut. So the astrologer and Drosselmeyer wandered the world for 15 years, having no luck in finding this incredible nut. Eventually, they found themselves staying with a cousin of Drosselmeyer's in Nuremberg, who, upon hearing the story, did a little bit of a jig and said, you are in so much luck, cousin, because unless I'm mistaken, I own the Crackatook. How's that for a crazy random happenstance? It was this whole thing. There was a guy who was selling bags of nuts. It cost me like $20 and then I painted it gold for some reason. Don't even worry about it. On top of that, Drosselmeyer's Nurembergian cousin happened to have a son who, although he was young, had never yet shaven, had never worn boots, dressed himself quite well, and had a habit of charming all of the young ladies of the town by cracking nuts for them between his teeth. The astrologer became more than convinced that this was the boy they were looking for. They made their way back to the kingdom triumphant after all this time, and the hideous young lady, who was the princess, upon laying eyes on this young Drosselmeyer, thought, ooh la la, I want a piece of that. Young Mr. Drosselmeyer was promised the hand of the princess in marriage and the entire kingdom if he could break the curse. I'm hitting my hands together a lot. And so he did what he was asked. With his eyes closed, he cracked the Crackatook between his teeth and handed the meat of it to the princess, who ate it and immediately began to become her beautiful self again, and everyone was so pleased that they all did their silly one-leg spinning dance again. No one even noticed then that the young man was still completing his 7 steps backwards. In fact, he was just about finished his 7th step when Lady Mouserings popped out of the ground for one last ruining of events, right underneath the boy's heel, and made him stumble and fall. The impact of his foot on her body did kill her, but just before she died, she got to see as the young man transformed, his head growing large, his beautiful smile becoming much too wide a grin, his little legs shrinking down, and he became the hideous Nutcracker. The now once again beautiful princess, turning around to see her beautiful new husband, was greeted with the sight of an ugly little nutcracker instead. And she said, "Ew, who's trying to get me to marry a nutcracker? That's really gross." And so the king had the Drosselmeyers chucked out of his kingdom. Get out of here. Now after a few weeks, Marie healed up completely and was able to run around and play again. But instead, she mostly chose to spend her time sitting in front of the display cabinet, looking at her nutcracker and thinking about how she now knew his story. "If there's anything I can do to help," she said to the nutcracker, "I'm more than happy to do it." Funny you should say that, Marie, because that night she heard scritching and scratching in her bedroom walls, and the Mouse King, all 7 heads, came bounding up onto her bedside table and said to her, "Yo, Marie, you know all them sweets you got for Christmas? I want you to give them to me, because if you don't, I am going to bite your nutcracker to pieces." And so Marie, terrified and sad to lose all of her Christmas sweets, did as she was told. She didn't want to lose the nutcracker. Her mother thought it was an awful shame and just couldn't work out how these mice had gotten into the house. But Marie was happy inside because she knew that she had saved her nutcracker. Except that night, she got another visit from the Mouse King, who came right up to her face and said, "Marie, you better give me all of your pretty coloring books, because if you don't, I will bite your nutcracker to pieces." Marie was devastated to lose her coloring books, but she did it because she wanted her nutcracker to be safe. Her mother was seriously starting to think that they had a rodent problem and was considering borrowing the butcher's cat from downstairs, a big grey old tomcat, to come hunt the mice for them. But Marie wasn't concerned with any of that because she knew deep down she had saved her nutcracker. Except that night, she was visited by the Mouse King again, who crawled up her arm and said, "Marie, all of your pretty little dollies, you better give them to me to eat, or I'm gonna bite your nutcracker to pieces." And Marie went to the nutcracker in the cabinet and said, "What more can I do? I can't just keep giving him things. Eventually I'll run out of all of my treasured possessions and he'll ask to eat me instead. And then what am I gonna do?" And then she heard the nutcracker's voice again. And he said, "Little Marie, my guardian, don't even worry about giving him your stuff anymore. All I need is a sword. If only I had a sword, I'd be able to kill the Mouse King myself." And Marie was on it. She went to the best person she knew for matters of swords and militariness. Fritz thought long and hard about what his sister had said. And once he decided that she was probably telling the truth, he thought, "I've got something you could use. One of my officers retired a few months back. He won't be using his saber anymore. Your nutcracker can use that." And he went to the cabinet and took off the belt and sword from his little officer and tied it around the nutcracker's waist, before saluting and marching away. That night Marie woke up late and heard the squeaks again and thought, "Oh no, the Mouse King is back. He's back. My poor lovely nutcracker. He's going to be bitten to pieces because I didn't lay out my beautiful dolls." But then she heard a little rat-a-tat-tat on her bedroom door, and opening it up, she saw the little nutcracker kneeling down on one knee and holding out his saber covered in blood, Mouse King blood, and all 7 Mouse King crowns lined up on his arm as a trophy. "My dearest Marie," he said, "thanks to you I have vanquished my enemy, and if you would let me, I would like to repay you the favor by taking you to see my kingdom." And he did! Somehow Marie got shrunk down and they went through like the back of the corridor wardrobe and they ended up in the kingdom of the dolls. This is a place full of just the most amazing things. It's like dewdrop laneways and Christmas forest and rivers made of lemonade, whole towns made of toffee, little sugar huntresses who do ballet for you, and the nutcracker, who happened to be the ruler of this kingdom, to spend the whole time saying, "Oh, this is so embarrassing. I can't believe that they did such a bad job of that ballet. I'm so sorry. Please don't even... Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Oh, this river isn't nearly as good as the other ones. I'm so sorry. I swear it's not usually this bad." "We get it. You hate things." Marie's like, yeah, you know that ballet was amazing, right? And it was performed by sugar people? Shut up. Anyway, they make it to the capital and there's this huge loud noise coming from inside because apparently everyone is celebrating all the time in the capital. And 3 different parades for 3 separate things had all come together in the marketplace and accidentally bumped into each other and knocked everything over. And now they were arguing loudly with one another. Until the mayor of the town climbed up the obelisk in the center, which was made out of cake, and stood on top with a silver bell ringing it, and loudly shouted 3 times, "Candyman! Candyman! Candyman!" And everyone went silent and went back to their own business, stopped arguing instantly. "Who the hell is the Candyman?" said Marie. "Oh," said the Nutcracker, "he's just this, unknown, uber-powerful being who controls the destiny of every single life in the kingdom of the dolls, and he's going to be the eventual doom of us all." "Hey, a castle made of marzipan, how about that?" Just brushes right past that topic, just skims right over it. Not telling us any more about the Candyman? Okay, alright, fine, that's fine. They got to the Nutcracker's marzipan palace, and several sisters of his came out to greet him and hug him and said, "You're alive, you came back to us." And he said, "Yeah, thanks to Marie. How much better is Marie than that princess who was mean to me and threw me out of the castle when I got turned into a nutcracker, right?" But Marie, who'd gotten barely any sleep that night, had fallen asleep. Once again, she woke up in a little bit of a daze in her own bed. She tried to tell her family about all the spectacular things she'd seen in this other world, but they just thought that she was believing a dream she'd had. They thought it was hilarious. They were laughing. So Marie got cross, went to her bedroom, and got the 7 crowns of the Mouse King, and showed them to her mother and father and said, "There! How's that for evidence?" This did make them pause and consider exactly how she'd gotten such beautiful, intricate little crowns. Till Drosselmeyer came in his big yellow coat, big stinking yellow coat, and he took one look at the crowns and said, "Yeah, I made these for Marie for her 2nd birthday. Seriously, does no one in this family remember the things I make for them? Talk about ungrateful." Marie shouted at Drosselmeyer once again, saying, "You know the truth. You know that he's your nephew, and you know that this is all the truth. Why are you telling them that I'm lying?" This was one outburst too many, and her parents took her aside and said, "Marie, it has been far too long since you had your injury. You can't be talking about these hallucinations anymore. You need to stop it. If you say one more thing about this magical land or the Nutcracker being a real person, we will throw the Nutcracker out." And so Marie stopped talking about it. But she did spend her days sitting in front of the display cabinet looking at her Nutcracker, just thinking about all the things she had seen in the kingdom of the dolls, until one day she accidentally just let slip out of her mouth, "You know what, Nutcracker? I never would have left you like that princess did. I would have loved you anyway, no matter how ugly you were." And there was a loud bang and Marie passed out on the floor. That happens a lot in this story. When she woke up, she heard voices in the other room because Judge Drosselmeyer's nephew from Nuremberg had come to visit. He was a handsome young lad in fine clothes who charmed the whole family by cracking open nuts for them with his teeth. Marie, upon seeing him, just sat in stunned silence, blushing like crazy, until the young Drosselmeyer held out his hand and asked her to accompany him to the other room. He stood with Marie in front of the display cabinet and said, "Most excellent Mistress Stahlbaum, this is where you saved me from the Mouse King, and I would like to thank you for that, by taking you to live in my doll kingdom as my queen." And the 2 of them got married and lived happily ever after and whatever. But the thing that gets me, she was like 7 at the start of this story. That is specified. So how long has it been? Because that seems like not okay. But anyway, that's my Christmas story for this year. I hope it was to your liking. If it was, you can show that by hitting the like button. Other things you can do to show your support, you can of course subscribe to the channel. If you want to get videos from me every week, I do storytelling videos like this or mythology stories every 2 weeks, or you can share the video, whether it be on your favorite social media website, my links are in the description below, or in real life with just people you know who you think might enjoy it. Have a happy 25th, but apart from that, I do believe that that's it. I'm done. Email this to your grandma and I will see you some other time.
Jingle, 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 jingle.